You are still catching your breath when the rule descends. The shutters are closed, the rushlight gutters. The bed smells of sweat, wool, and faint incense carried in from the chapel earlier that evening. Outside, the abbey bell marks the hour like a slow heartbeat. Inside, you lie beside your husband and feel the air change. Not colder, heavier. You turn your head to speak, maybe to laugh, maybe to ask if he locked the door, maybe to say nothing important at all. His hand tightens on your wrist. Do not. That is the rule, not written in the marriage rite, not carved above the church door, but known, whispered, enforced. A wife who speaks after the act proves she is ruled by appetite. A wife who questions proves she is calculating. A wife who laughs proves she enjoyed herself too much. And enjoyment, as every sermon reminds you, is suspicious. Welcome to the holy math of medieval sexuality. Pleasure plus voice equals danger. It sounds absurd now. It was deadly then. You are somewhere in 14th century England, maybe in a timber-bird house under the authority of a local manor, maybe in a cramped room above a cobbled lane in York. The year does not matter as much as the structure. The church dominates law. Canon courts regulate marriage. Priests preach from pulpits about Eve, temptation, and the fragile male soul. Desire is allowed only for procreation. Even that is handled like a hazardous substance. The theologians are not subtle about it. By the 13th century, church scholars drawing from Augustine and later from Thomas Aquinas argue that female sexuality is unstable, more carnal, more susceptible to demonic influence. A woman's voice, especially in intimate settings, is treated as a lever. It moves men, it tempts, it persuades. And persuasion is power. So you learn restraint. Not just in public. In private. In some penitential manual circulating across England and parts of France during the High Middle Ages, confessors are instructed to question women about modesty within marriage. Did she speak immodestly? Did she encourage excess? Did she seek pleasure beyond her duty? These manuals, copied by hand and passed between clerics, function like behavioral checklists. No one calls it post-intimacy silence. But the implication is clear. Quiet equals virtue. Speech equals appetite, and appetite, when housed in a female body, is treated like a crack in a dam. You sit up in bed. The candle hisses. Your husband rolls away, already half asleep. For him, the act is concluded. For you, the aftermath is the test. Say nothing, because if you speak and he later feels guilt, he will remember your voice. If you speak and a pregnancy does not come, he may wonder whether your words carried some hidden intention. If you speak and he confesses uncertainty to the priest will ask questions about your conduct. And if enough suspicion gathers, you risk something worse than gossip. You risk witchcraft. It does not take much. A cow that sickens. A child who dies. A harvest that fails. Europe is a continent of fragile systems and quick blame. By the 15th century, texts like the Malleus Maleficarum will openly argue that women are more prone to sorcery because they are more carnal and more talkative. More talkative. As if speech itself is a spell. You feel it now. The weight of centuries pressing your tongue to the roof of your mouth. Silence becomes your shield. Silence becomes your performance of innocence. The irony is almost funny. The same culture that insists you submit to marital duty now insists you appear untouched by it. You must participate without seeming to participate. Engage without enthusiasm. Fulfill without expression. Corporate branding, medieval edition. Deliver the service. Do not show excitement. You swallow a laugh at the thought. Even humor feels dangerous here. The room creaks. Outside, wind scrapes along the shutters like fingernails. Your husband mutters something in his sleep. You lie still, rehearsing virtue. And yet, across the village, other women lie awake too. Some bite their tongues, some whisper anyway. And some, in the soft dark, begin to realize that silence is not holiness. It is control. You turn your face toward the wall and understand something you were never meant to articulate. The rule is not about purity. It is about narrative. If you speak, you shape the story of what just happened. If you remain silent, the story belongs to him, to the priest, to the law. You close your eyes. In the morning, a rumor will begin about a woman 3 houses down. She laughed too loudly after betting. Her husband claims she bewitched him with her voice. By winter, she will stand before a court, and you will remember this moment, when you chose not to speak, because next time you might not choose silence at all, and someone will hear you. Someone always does. Law in the bedchamber. You walk through the market square at dawn, skirts brushing mud, the smell of fish and wood smoke clinging to the air. Life here is practical. Bread must be baked, wool must be spun, bodies must be fed. And bodies must be regulated. By the 13th century, church courts across England handle thousands of cases involving marriage, adultery, impotence, and illicit unions. The records survive. Ink on parchment, real names, real accusations. A wife who refuses intimacy can be summoned. A husband who cannot perform can be examined. Witnesses testify about what they heard through thin walls. Imagine that. Your neighbors listening for rhythm, for argument, for pleasure. Privacy is a luxury no one can afford. In some diocesan court records from London and Canterbury, women are described as too eager, too forward, too verbally expressive within marriage. The language is careful but pointed. She incited him. She enticed him. She spoke indecently. There it is again. Speech as evidence. You sit in a wooden pew while a priest lectures on modesty. He quotes Paul. Wives, submit. He elaborates. Submission includes demeanor, tone, silence. The subtext is clear. A good wife is passive before, during, and after. Because if she is not, she disrupts the hierarchy. Medieval society runs on hierarchy the way your body runs on blood. God above king. King above lord. Lord above peasant. Husband above wife. Order is everything. Disorder is sin. A woman who speaks freely after intimacy suggests equality, mutuality, agency. That is a crack in the structure. Let me explain what actually matters here. It is not that every husband enforced a gag rule. It is that cultural suspicion attached to female expression in sexual contexts created consequences. If a man felt shame, he externalized it. If a pregnancy failed, someone needed blame. If desire felt too strong, it could not possibly originate in him. So you become the source. By the late medieval period, sermons frequently warn men about women who manipulate through charm and conversation. The archetype of the seductress blends with the archetype of the witch. Both use words. And once witch trials accelerate in the 5th, 10th, and 16th centuries, verbal behavior becomes part of the accusation pattern. Did she murmur strange things? Did she whisper after lying with her husband? Did she boast? Boasting is practically treason. You hear about a case in a nearby town. A woman named Marjorie, married 10 years, no surviving children. Her husband confesses to the priest that she speaks to him after the act, questioning whether God truly condemns pleasure between spouses. That single question becomes evidence of spiritual rebellion. Marjorie is summoned. Neighbors testify that she is sharp-tongued, that she reads more than is proper, that she once argued about tithes. Ambition in a woman looks a lot like witchcraft to a frightened community. You imagine her standing before the ecclesiastical court, the cold floor, the smell of ink and damp wool, men debating whether her words indicate heresy, all because she refused to perform docile quiet. The absurdity would be comedic if the penalties were not so real. Public penance, fines, social ostracism. In later centuries, worse, so you adjust your behavior. Strategic compliance. You master the art of the blank expression. You speak of linens, of crops, of children, never of what happens in the dark. But here is what cracks the surface. Women talk to each other. In kitchens, in fields, while washing clothes by the river. They exchange coded language. They joke about husbands who fall asleep too quickly. They complain about expectations. They ask quiet theological questions that would scandalize a confessor. This is the underground network no court record fully captures. Silence in the bedchamber does not equal silence in the village, and the church senses that undercurrent, which is why control intensifies, manuals expand, confession becomes more probing. After the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215 mandates annual confession, priests gain direct access to the intimate details of married life. You kneel in a dark confessional and feel the power imbalance like a hand at your throat. The priest asks careful questions. Did you speak improperly? Did you encourage excess? You answer with caution. No, Father, because the safest narrative is always the smallest one. Still, as you leave the church, you feel something unsettled. A question you did not ask. If God designed your voice, why is it most dangerous in the moment you are closest to another human being? That question lingers, and one night soon, someone will decide to ask it out loud. The case of Anne Underwood. You stand in a small wooden meeting house in early colonial Massachusetts, 1647. The Atlantic wind rattles the walls. Puritan theology has crossed the ocean intact. Strict and suspicious. Different continent. Same anxiety. The magistrates sit at a long table, faces stern, Bibles open. The air smells of damp timber and fear. Anne Underwood stands before them, married, childless, accused. Not of adultery, not directly of witchcraft. Not yet. She's accused of improper conduct within marriage. Her husband claims she speaks strangely after lying with him, that she questions whether pleasure itself is sinful, that she once laughed and said perhaps Eve was misunderstood. You almost admire her nerve. The magistrate asks whether she denies these statements. She answers calmly. She says she has only asked questions about Scripture. There it is again. Speech is subversion. Puritan culture in 17th century New England is obsessed with visible sainthood. Outward behavior signals inward grace. Women are expected to model modesty, obedience, and restraint. Marriage is encouraged, but lust is still treated as morally volatile. If a wife appears too invested in pleasure, suspicion blooms. Anne's neighbors testify. She is educated. She reads. She speaks confidently in gatherings. She once corrected a man's interpretation of a sermon. That correction becomes part of the narrative. The court does not need proof of sorcery. It needs deviation. You watch the proceedings unfold. The questions are indirect, but relentless. Does she tempt her husband? Does she seek control? Does she undermine his spiritual authority? Control, authority, these are the real stakes. Anne insists she loves her husband. She insists her questions are theological, not rebellious. She insists that silence is not commanded in Scripture after marital relations. Bold move. The magistrates confer. The room hums with tension. You feel the old pattern replaying itself across an ocean. Female voice equals instability. Instability equals threat. Anne is not executed, not this time. But she is censured, publicly admonished, warned against immodest discourse. Her husband is counseled to assert firmer leadership. In plain language, she's told to be quiet. As she leaves the meeting house, you catch her expression. Not broken. Not ashamed. Angry. Anger is dangerous fuel. Here is what matters. In both medieval Europe and early America, the regulation of women's voices in sexual contexts is not random superstition. It is structural. Control intimacy, and you control lineage. Control lineage, and you control property. Control property, and you control society. It is all connected. If a woman can influence her husband privately, she can influence decisions publicly. If she can question doctrine in bed, she can question it in church. And institutions do not appreciate slippery slopes. You walk home through cold mud and realize something unsettling. The rule about silence after intimacy is less about purity than about information control. If she speaks, she might reveal dissatisfaction. If she reveals dissatisfaction, she might seek change. If she seeks change, she destabilizes the hierarchy. So better to brand her speech as impurity. Branding is powerful. Once labeled immodest, every word she utters is suspect. Anne Underwood returns to her house. That night, you imagine her lying beside her husband again. The candle burns low. He turns toward her. She opens her mouth, and for a split second, you do not know whether she will obey the warning. Whispers in the dark, you are back in a stone house in late 15th century Germany. The plague has thinned the population. Fear is currency. The church tightens doctrine. Pamphlets circulate describing witches as women who corrupt men through seduction and speech. The pattern is now explicit. The Malleus Maleficarum, published in 1487, argues that women are more prone to witchcraft because they are more impressionable and more talkative. The authors claim that female desire leads to demonic pacts. Talkative. As if conversation itself opens a portal to hell. You sit beside a hearth with other women. The men are away. The air smells of cabbage and smoke. Someone tells a story about a wife who refused to stay silent after intimacy, and later was accused of causing her husband's impotence. The women laugh softly. Dark humor. Survival humor. One of them leans closer and says what no sermon dares to admit. If God hated pleasure so much, why design bodies that respond to it? The question hangs in the air like forbidden incense. You feel the shift. This is resistance, not with swords, with thought. Women develop coded strategies. Silence in front of men, honesty among themselves, herbal knowledge shared quietly, emotional support traded in whispers. The official narrative paints them as manipulative. The unofficial reality reveals them as analytical. And occasionally, defiant. A midwife named Greta is rumored to counsel brides privately. She tells them that their bodies are not inherently sinful. She tells them that speaking gently to a husband can build trust rather than destroy it. She tells them that silence is not divinely mandated. Greta is careful. Very careful, but rumors spread. One winter, a man accuses his wife of bewitching him. He claims she murmured strange blessings after lying with him. He claims he felt drained. The accusation reaches the local authorities. Greta's name surfaces as an influence. You feel the dread before it happens. The arrest, the interrogation, the questions about whispered words in dark rooms. It always circles back to speech, because speech implies agency. Agency implies autonomy. Autonomy implies a crack in control. Greta is taken for questioning. The village watches. You stand at the edge of the crowd as she is led past. Her hands bound, her face calm, almost serene. Someone shouts that she corrupted wives, that she encouraged them to speak. Encouraged them to speak. As if that alone is heresy. The sky is low and gray. The church bell tolls. You feel centuries of women holding their tongues behind you, pressing forward. Greta meets your eyes for a brief moment, and you realize something chilling. Silence can be enforced, but once a question has been asked, it does not disappear. It waits. And in the cell beneath the chapel, as interrogators prepare their next demand, Greta decides whether she will answer them quietly, or not at all. The confession trap. You kneel on cold stone. The confessional screen smells of old wood and breath that lingers too long. Somewhere beyond the lattice, a priest shifts his weight. You hear the rustle of fabric, the faint scrape of a shoe. Outside, candles burn low before painted saints who have never been asked what it feels like to be blamed for desire. It is 1323 in a parish near Canterbury. Annual confession is no longer optional. Since the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, every Christian is required to confess at least once a year, which means the church now holds a ledger not just of your public sins, but your private thoughts. Your marriage is not beyond review. The priest begins gently. Have you fulfilled your marital duty? Have you withheld yourself? Have you sought pleasure beyond procreation? Then comes the sharper edge. Have you spoken immodestly to your husband? After the act, have you encouraged further indulgence? Have you questioned the righteousness of restraint? You feel the trap. If you admit to speaking, you risk appearing immodest. If you deny it too quickly, you risk appearing dishonest. The entire structure is designed to filter your voice through male interpretation. You answer carefully. You speak of obedience, of modesty, of restraint. You do not mention the night you whispered that you felt more than guilt. You do not mention the time you asked why Scripture condemns lust but sanctifies marriage. You do not mention that your husband once admitted he fears his own pleasure more than your words, because confession is not neutral. It is data collection. Let me explain what matters here. The medieval church does not simply regulate acts, it regulates narrative. By inserting itself into the aftermath of intimacy, it ensures that no private experience remains fully private. The confessional becomes a surveillance system built on theology. Priests are trained to detect signs of excess. Manuals such as the Summa for confessors circulate with detailed questions about marital conduct. Women are interrogated about tone, about enthusiasm, about whether they initiate or respond. Initiation is risky. Enthusiasm is riskier. And speech after intimacy? That suggests awareness, reflection, possibly dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction is destabilizing. Because if a wife can articulate what she wants, she can articulate what she lacks. And if she lacks, she might seek change. And if she seeks change, the hierarchy tremble is dot, so silence is coded as virtue. Across Europe, the same pattern repeats. In northern Italy, in parts of France, in the German states, ecclesiastical courts hear cases where husbands claim their wives are too assertive in bed, too verbal, too independent in thought. The language varies. The theme does not. You leave the confessional and step into daylight that feels almost aggressive. The village hums with ordinary life. Chickens scratch. Children chase each other through dust. No one can see the interrogation you just survived, but it sits inside you. You begin to notice how often women lower their voices when speaking of intimacy. How quickly conversations shift to safer ground. How jokes trail off when men enter the room. You also notice something else. The more the church insists on silence, the more curiosity spreads. Whispers multiply. In taverns and kitchens, women share fragments of knowledge. They talk about herbal tonics, about cycles, about pleasure, about fear. They analyze sermons with surprising precision. They are not ignorant. They are strategic. One evening, a woman named Isabel confides that her husband reported her to the priest after she asked whether mutual pleasure might strengthen a marriage. He accused her of tempting him into excess. She was ordered to perform public penance, barefoot, head covered, standing before the congregation while the priest warned others about feminine cunning. Her crime was not lust. Her crime was articulation. You walk home through twilight and feel the pressure mounting. The system is airtight. Confession, sermon, court, rumor. Every channel loops back to the same conclusion. A good wife is quiet, but here's the crack in the wall. Silence breeds analysis. Analysis breeds resistance, because when you are forbidden to speak in one space, you learn to think more sharply in another. And somewhere, in a house not far from yours, a woman decides she will not confess what she does not believe is sinful. Which means the next time the priest asks about her voice, she will choose her words carefully, or she will choose none at all. Property, lineage, and the fear of influence. You stand in a manor hall in 1408, somewhere in rural France. The Lord's steward reads from a parchment concerning inheritance. Land passes through bloodlines. Bloodlines must be legitimate. Legitimacy depends on certainty. Certainty depends on control. This is the engine behind the silence rule, because if a woman speaks freely after intimacy, she demonstrates influence over the most private bond in the hierarchy. Influence over a husband means potential influence over property decisions, alliances, and succession. In a world where land equals survival, that is not a small matter. Under coverture laws in England, a married woman's legal identity merges with her husband's. She cannot independently own property in most cases. She cannot sign contracts without him. Her body becomes part of the marital estate. Romantic, right? The irony is brutal. She is essential to producing heirs, yet excluded from managing the system those heirs inherit, which makes her voice dangerous. If she can question her husband's authority in bed, she might question his decisions about land. If she can persuade him privately, she might redirect power. So culture frames her persuasion as manipulation, as witchcraft, as impurity. You watch a dispute unfold between a noble couple. The wife is rumored to advise her husband on estate matters. Servants whisper that she speaks boldly at night, urging him to challenge a neighboring lord's claim. When the husband later loses a legal battle, he blames her counsel. Suddenly, her speech is recast as meddling, as emasculating, as morally suspect. The narrative shifts fast. It always does. Let me be blunt. The anxiety about women speaking after intimacy is not theological at its core. It is economic. Control the bed, control the bloodline. Control the bloodline, control the land. Everything else is decoration. In early modern Germany, accusations of witchcraft often include claims that women dominated their husbands, that they bewitched them into obedience, that they whispered commands at night. Night becomes a theater of suspicion. You imagine lying beside a man who fears not your body, but your influence. A man taught that if he feels swayed, it must be sorcery rather than partnership. You see how fragile masculinity becomes in this framework. Any hint of shared authority feels like loss. So the culture responds with scripts. Wives should be modest, reserved, quiet after marital relations. They should not boast, not joke, not analyze. They should not appear satisfied, because satisfaction suggests agency. Agency suggests equality. Equality threatens hierarchy. Across the channel, English pamphlets circulate warning husbands against shrews. The term becomes shorthand for a woman who speaks too much, especially within marriage. Popular ballads mock domineering wives. The humor is sharp. The message sharper. Silence equals safety. But the lived reality is more complex. In private letters that survive from late medieval and early modern Europe, you find glimpses of mutual affection, of couples discussing household strategy, of wives advising husbands with intelligence and care. The official doctrine preaches silence. Real marriages negotiate something more fluid. That tension creates stress fractures. One night, in a farmhouse near the Rhine, a husband confronts his wife. He accuses her of overstepping, of speaking too confidently after they lie together, of making him feel less certain. She replies that partnership does not erase his authority. It strengthens it. He hesitates. Because deep down, he knows she is right. But admitting that means questioning everything he has been taught. So he reports her to the local pastor, and once again, a woman's voice moves from bedroom to courtroom. You stand outside the church as she is summoned. Villagers gather. Some curious, some judgmental, some quietly supportive. The pastor will ask whether she has spoken immodestly, whether she has influenced her husband improperly. Improperly. As if influence itself is indecent. You feel the old pattern tightening, and you begin to understand something else. The silence rule survives not because every man enforces it, but because enough men fear losing control. Fear is easier to preach than partnership. And tonight, as candles flicker in the pastor's study, that fear is about to decide her fate. Witchcraft and the weaponization of words. You smell smoke before you see it. It is 1589 in parts of the Holy Roman Empire. Witch trials surge. Pamphlets circulate with lurid descriptions of women consorting with demons. Interrogations intensify. Torture becomes normalized under certain legal codes. The accusations are rarely random. They cluster around patterns, midwives, women who argue, women who speak boldly, women who are rumored to exert influence over husbands. And again, Whispers after intimacy become part of the story. You sit in a cramped courtroom where a woman named Katerina stands accused. Her husband claims that after lying with him, she muttered blessings over his body, that she laughed softly, that he later felt weak. Weakness in this era is not a medical issue. It is a moral one. The inquisitors ask whether she used words to drain him, whether she spoke charms, whether she asserted dominance. Dominance. Notice the pivot. What begins as suspicion about speech becomes an allegation of supernatural control. Under torture, confessions are extracted. Some women admit to impossible things, to flying, to consorting with demons, to using their voices to command spirits. Pain will make anyone say anything, but the cultural script was written long before the confession. The Malleus Maleficarum argues that women are more prone to witchcraft because they are intellectually weaker, yet more carnal and talkative. The logic is twisted but consistent. Female speech equals instability. Instability equals gateway to evil. You watch Katerina deny the charges. She insists her words were prayers, that she sought to bless her marriage. The court hears manipulation. You feel the terror in the room, not just hers. Everyone's, because if words in a bedroom can be recast as sorcery, then no intimacy is safe. Let me say what history often whispers instead of declares. Witch trials were not just about superstition. They were about control in times of crisis. War, plague, famine, economic instability. Communities sought scapegoats. Women who deviated from prescribed silence made convenient targets. Katerina's trial drags on. Witnesses describe her as strong-willed, opinionated, too comfortable speaking her mind. Too comfortable. That phrase echoes like a verdict. You think about all the times you swallowed a thought, all the times you edited your tone, all the times you let a conversation die rather than risk suspicion. Survival strategy. But survival does not equal acceptance. In hidden spaces, women continue to share knowledge. Herbal remedies pass from hand to hand. Stories circulate of women who refused to stay silent and paid the price. These stories become cautionary tales. They also become inspiration, because every execution leaves behind witnesses who learn both fear and clarity. Katerina is sentenced. The crowd gathers. You do not watch the final moment. You do not need to. The smoke carries the message. Silence is safety, but something else rides the wind. Anger. And anger, unlike speech, does not need words to spread. In the years that follow, skepticism slowly grows in parts of Europe. Legal standards tighten. Intellectual movements question superstition. The Enlightenment will eventually chip away at witchcraft prosecutions. But for now, you stand in a world where a woman's whisper can be reframed as a curse, and you wonder how many whispers have already been buried. Because in the dark, when no one is listening, women are still speaking, and the authorities know it.